The first thing I'd like us to take a look at in this project is how we can create our various shapes using some of the primitives that exist directly inside of ZBrush. So a little word about ZBrush's primitives. It's a little bit different than some of the other programs. The way that I could describe it is you're going to have to kind of work on the primitives isolated in an alone kind of an arena, and you're going to put some settings to that. You're going to take those settings, kind of freeze them, and then work on them. They've got this thing called Make Polymesh 3D, and that's how you convert a primitive into actual geometry that you can work with. And until you click this Make Polymesh 3D, you're just working with a primitive that's just going to let you have the shape and alter the shape, and that's all cool. But you're not going to be able to sculpt on it and do all the things that you want to do with it. So to me, it's a little bit frustrating just because I don't know a particular way to have the primitives integrated into a lot of other shapes. So I'll show you what I mean by this. If we come over here to this area and click on the tool, no matter what your scene looks like or what you're working with, you're going to have access to these 3D meshes. So here's all the different primitive shapes that you see within inside of ZBrush. So what I'm going to work on is this torus kind of shape here. So you can see this. I'm going to go ahead and then click on this ring 3D like that. And you can see as soon as we click on the primitive, it throws it into a new subtool and comes in this way. Now it's possible that if you already have a bunch of subtools and you want to append something, you can append it, but it's going to freeze whatever the default settings are for that and kind of import it in that way. So you're not going to get access to the creation on these things. So you can see here's a ring 3D that I started with and altered the shape for that. I'll turn on the polyframe, and then this is what we're going to kind of push and work on to get there. But this is the default setting for this ring 3D that you can see as we just clicked here and said ring 3D. This is the primitive for it. And if we come down to the bottom, let's say we want to have subtool open. I'm going to take the subtool visible count and drop that down a little bit just to shrink this window. And if we want to go down to this initialize area, we've looked at before with some geometry in the initialize area. If you go here, this is where you can set up your Q cube, your Q cylinder, and Q sphere and everything. But that's on regular geometry. These primitives, this is where you get to change the different settings that you see for this on here. So you can see we've got a radius on this one here. We've got coverage. So if you want to do something like 90, you can see we can make a perfect bend on here. Let me go back here and hit 90 and hit enter. I think I have my numlock key off. So there we go. And this radius, again, we can control this out. You can put a very specific number on there, like 50, if you want to do that. You can twist the geometry if you wanted to. You also have this S divide, and then that's going to give you how many spans going around on here that you have. I think this, you can see with a 6, this is going to give us a nice division that we've got here. And then this L divide is going to give us the division that we see within through here. So we can pump this down here. Let me go ahead and take this coverage and put it back up to 360. And then this L divide, if I put this on something like 32, if we do something like 8, you can see this pattern that we have. Basically, if we were able to kind of think about this in a chunk of 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, making up the whole here, these give us really nice numbers to have division on here. So even lower would be something like 4, and then we go 8, and then we can go to 16, and then we go to 32. So we're just doubling that number, and then 64 if you wanted. So I'll put this on 16, and I think this is going to give me a nice amount of geometry to kind of work with, because we'll take this and we'll turn this into a model that we can work with the Z modeler tool. Okay, so we've got that. We have this twist, so that'll kind of twist it this way. Let's just see about this. So if we do a 360, we can get geometry that kind of looks like this. So there are some really, really cool things about the primitives that they have within here. And like I was saying, maybe I'm just missing it, but as far as I know, there's not a way to have this kind of live with a bunch of different objects. You kind of have to create the object in this manner, all by itself. And then when you're done with this, then we will take this and make a Polymesh 3D. I do believe we can still rotate the object and everything else like that. So I'm going to put this on the gizmo tool right here like that. And then it doesn't really matter if it's on move, scale, or rotate. We're going to have the same options for this. So I'm just going to rotate this forward like this, hold down shift, and then rotate 90 degrees. And then this will give me my piece of geometry that I want to start working with. So if I am happy with this, there's two different things that I can do with this. I can say make Polymesh 3D, and then that will create a new model. And you can see it says PM3D underscore ring 3D2. So that's whatever that name of that was. And then as the Polymesh 3D in front of it. Now this is geometry that I'm going to hold down shift and then click to open up this right here. We can start dividing the model like that. And so I'm going to hit undo to get back. So we can start adding subdivision levels to the model. We can start modeling with it. It's a regular piece of geometry now. We've converted it over. So that's one thing that we could do. The other thing that we could do is we could be in this mode where we want to append this to some other thing that we've got going on. So we might have multiple subtools. So I'll just hold on shift, open that up. And if I go to some location on here, and let's just say maybe this top folder, something like that, I can hit append, and then I can find that ring, the second one, ring 3D1 right here. I can append that, and you can see how that's going to add a new piece of geometry. And if I hit append, it's going to put it at the very bottom. Now, if you want it to actually append in the stack where you've got it selected, you would use insert instead, and it would insert it within that stack. I'll put it on solo, and you can see what we've got going on here for that model. I'm going to go ahead and hit delete just to delete it out there. I just wanted to show you that that's how you could kind of add that for that. Let's go back to this Polymesh 3D, and then I will show you with the Z modeler tool and some other tools what we could do to hold hard edges. So we've already kind of looked at this in previous videos, but if we want to make this into polygroups, we can go to the polygroups area right down here, open that up, and then I'm going to go ahead and say group by normals. Click that, and you can see that this angle that we've got is going to give us some pretty nice results. Okay. So what I can do with that at that point, I can hold down shift, open this up, and go to crease. And I'm going to crease my polygroups, but I'm going to put my crease level at about 3. And I'll say crease polygroup like this. And then I'll put it on dynamic subdivisions right up here. So I'll hold down shift and open that up too. I'll turn on dynamic subdiv like this, and I'll put my level up past 3. So I've got 2 subdivision levels, so let's just push this down. So this is adding 1 subdivision level, 2, 3, and we've creased it to 3, and then watch what happens to these corners. We'll push it to 4, and you can see it starts to round out. I can turn off the polyframe for that and just see the geometry, and if I want more geometry I can push it up to 5 and maybe even 6. So that gives me a pretty nice looking shape that we can start working with. Now if I want to convert this over at any point into out of this dynamic subdivision level, we can hit apply. But if I want to do more operations to this, I can hit shift D to drop it down here. I'll put on the polyframe, and then we can go into the Z modeler brush that we've got here. And again, always remember we can tap B and then tap Z to find this stuff within here. So you could use the brush menu. This is just me using my interface to kind of get to this stuff a little bit easier. Try to remember that we can hover our cursor over faces, over edges, and verts. And if we right click and hold, or we do the space bar, we're going to get different options depending if we're over a face, an edge, or a vert. I'm going to go over the edges, right click, and say insert, and I'm able to insert an edge within here. If I right click on here now and I say bevel and I do edge loop complete, I should be able to click on this and add a new edge loop like this. If I hover my cursor over a face, right click, say Q mesh, and I'll do polygroup. I'll do polygroup all, and as long as I don't have that polygroup within somewhere else in the model, which I don't believe I do, I should be able to click and drag this within here like that. Now I don't have creasing on here. So if I tap D for the dynamic subdivision levels, let's just tap D for that. I'll say always yes. I'll skip this until reset. If you want this nice and smooth like this, that might be what you're looking for. But if not, let's hit Shift D. And we'll go back into the Z Modeler tool. And they've got a nice tool for hovering over edges. I'm going to hold down the space bar and I'll do crease. And then they should have a crease. You can do one edge at a time, or you can do edge loop complete. I'm going to do edge loop complete. And we can click on this. I'll crease this here, and here, and here. Now I'll tap D, and you can see we're going to get really nice, crisp lines and geometry for that. Okay? So I think I'm going to go ahead and rename this, and I'll call this face ring, just so I can remember what that was. Then I'm going to go and show you this primitive type. We'll do this sphere 3D. And again, very similar. We click on this. This is still just a primitive. We can go down to the bottom. We can hold down Shift to open up the initialize area if we want to take a look at Subtool and have other things open at the same time as far as what's visible in this stack within through here. Now we've got this initialize. We can align it Y if you want to align it Z, so it's facing straight down. So say you're going to do something like maybe like an eyeball or something to that effect. You've got that. You've got your size 100 by 100 by 100. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. We could scale these within here. So if you wanted to do something like this, you could, and drop it down in scale. You've also got this 360 coverage, so if you only wanted half a sphere or a fourth of a sphere, it's pretty easy to put that on 25 or 50. Let's see. Sorry, that I'm actually wrong about this. So this is actually going 360. Okay, so yeah, if you want half a sphere, you're going to do 180, and if you want a fourth, then you're going to do 90, like that. Okay, and then we also have this H divide, like this. So I'll drag this down even further, and let's just put this again on something like 8, and then the V divide, we'll drop this down, and I'll put this at 8 as well. So if we wanted a really low res sphere, we could use something like this in through here. So again, if I want to turn this into all quads, let me show you what we could do for this. We could make a Polymesh 3D again out of this, and then that makes it into regular geometry. If we go to the Z Modeler tool and we hover over our edges and then hold down the spacebar, we can use delete. And so we could delete this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, and go on the back side, delete these out, like that. And then now we've taken this mesh and we've converted everything to where there's just nothing but quads on here. So we can tap D on this as well to do the smooth mesh preview. I'm sorry, I'm thinking in Maya's terms. So in Maya, that's a smooth mesh preview, and ZBrush, this is dynamic subdiv. So I'll drag this up here, hold down Shift, open this up in geometry, go back in this area, and I can crank this up a bit higher until we get really smooth geometry, just like that. And at that point, if you hold down Shift D, I can go back here, and we can still use all the different tools that we have inside of ZBrush with the Z Modeler tools. I can use the insert like this, and then just click and drag this thing out, maybe like this, and maybe drag another one, and tap D, and you can see it's going to kind of flatten that part out or harden that edge, depending how close we get. I'm going to hit undo for that. Shift D. Now if I really want to make that really nice and tight, I could get that even closer like this, tap D, and you can see how we can kind of flatten out that shape like this. I'll hit Shift D again, and if we wanted to make this nice and hard edge, we could hold an edge on this side, and then we could click and then hold an edge on this side as well, and tap D, and you can see how we can start to make really super clean geometry to kind of work with in this capacity. So it's really up to you what you want to do with these things. Now, if you just want to use this as a sphere, that's a possibility for you to do this as well. Now, I do know that this can be a little bit problematic because whenever you use this method, it kind of rounds out the geometry a little bit. So what I could do is I could append a real sphere to this. I'll do this sphere 3D, and I could scale this down. Again, that was a primitive and we just appended it, so it automatically converts it into this Make Polymesh 3D. I can scale this thing down and try to get it just to the right size of the other sphere, like this. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to this Polymesh 3D one, the very top one, and if I want the shape of this to conform to the shape of this, I'm going to show you what we've got here. We've got under Subtool, there's a project, and you can do this project all, and it basically, whatever's visible, it'll take this model and it'll shrink wrap it to that other model. So I'm going to say project all, just like that, and it should click down. And if I hit solo, I'll put it on here, and we can go back and forth between these two models. I'll go back up here like this. Now, the one thing I've got is this model is in dynamic subdiv mode. So what I'm going to do is hit apply, and it's actually going to convert that over into subdivision levels. So you can see we can step through this. Now at this point, when I go and do the project all, it should shrink it down. The distance, you can see this part shrunk down, but it didn't capture all of this here. So this distance needs to be increased. So I'll put this at 0.05 and just go up a little bit further. And you can see I've got to find this sweet spot. For this, I'll do 0.1, try that, and then project all. And you can see how it's now shrunk wrapped that thing to the sphere down below. So now we've got two different spheres. We've got this sphere here, which is the, it's got poles on here, and sometimes that can cause issues whenever you're sculpting. And then we've got this new sphere that's got nice quadded geometry. And then this can be pretty nice whenever we're going to sculpt on something. And it's going to give us nice, consistent results on here. So I'm going to put this on this, just on the Damien standard. I'll tap X to turn on symmetry. And you can see we can sculpt on this. I need more subdivision levels, so I'm going to hit Control D, or we can add subdivision levels just by dividing right here. I'll add one more, and you can see now we've got a nice amount of geometry to start sculpting on with this shape that we've got. So we've got really clean topology, everything's quadded, but we still have a sphere and we don't have any poles on that sphere anymore. So that might come in really handy in particular cases. Maybe it's a little bit advanced for where we're currently at, but as you start learning a little bit more about topology, maybe some of those things start to become a little bit more important for you. Okay, and so other primitive types that they've got in here, they've got a cone, and that becomes pretty self-explanatory. They've got a sweep profile 3D. That one's definitely probably a little bit more complex to take a look at. They've got a helix that you can use for springs. This gear 3D is a really interesting one. We'll just take a look at this real quick. So if you encounter some of these that have some of these, you'll see these profiles. So let's just run through this real quick. You can see that this one's got a coverage, and it probably feels very similar to what we looked at for the 360 for that. We've got a width on here. Let's just go to the side a little bit. So we've got a width on here. We've got a radius for the inner part. There's a skew for this, and within here, there's tilt. There's also this outer radius that you got. There's an inner radius. And let's pump this up just a little bit. So this outer profile, you can see with these points that you've got, you can alter the shape of this thing this way. If I click and drag this up all the way, you can see what's going on here. Now you can add other points within here. If you add another point, just click and drag out. If you want a hard edge point, you can click this out of here and then drag it back in. I know that's going to feel probably pretty weird to do that motion, but that's the controls that you have for this. So you can get a lot of really cool and interesting shapes by kind of playing around with this stuff. I'm just going to push this back out like this, and you can see what we got. We can basically flip-flop the direction of those gears like that, and if we want to close that back up, we can do that. Then we've got this outer section that you see here, and I think if you think of it this way, kind of turning the camera like this is what we've got for controlling the shape of this. So we could click and drag and pull this thing out here. We could reduce the amount of points that we have if you wanted to. You saw what I did there. I just clicked and dragged it out, and that will get rid of it. But if I pull it back in, it makes that hard edge point. So if I drag it out, it gets rid of it. If I add one there, it should be giving me a new point to kind of play around with. So I can try to push this right and through here like that. So yeah, so you can see we're completely changing the this outer profile, or outer section, sorry. And we've got this inner H, so we've got some controls for that. We've got controls for this part within here. This inner profile, we can change some things within here with that curve. Let's see this intersection. We can play around with these points too, and it's the same exact thing for each one of these curves. We've also have a divide for this, and it helps to have the Polyframe on for this information, so we can drop that down quite a bit lower, and I can drop this down quite a bit lower as well. And again, I would use numbers like 360. We've got 64, 128, 256, somewhere in there, maybe 512. Sorry, let me go back here like this. 512. That's a pretty high number in through there. So again, if we're 256 or so, you're going to have a really high number as well. We'll go 128 right in through there. And again, it's a interesting shape. I don't know what you're going to do with it, but you are going to find some other primitive types that are going to have some of these similar type of controls within here. So looking through here, the only other thing that I potentially could tell you is we do have Z-spheres. That's not exactly a primitive type, and maybe we'll spend a little bit of extra time just taking a look at just that particular one all by itself, because that's a whole different system for creating geometry, but that can be a very interesting way of creating geometry. But this should at least get you started and at least get you kind of curious about some of the different primitive types and what you could do to create different primitives. And again, for this project, what I was doing and saying was, if I take this off of solo and turn this off of Polyframe, is that you're going to have a base, you're going to have some kind of shape for an intersection part, you're going to have some extra appendage type shapes, you're going to have some shape at the top, and then some type of cap. So depending on how you want to create those shapes is entirely up to you. Now, previous videos, when we've taken a look at the stone creation project, we learned how we could take that geometry, use the modeler. So as you use these primitives, I don't want you to forget that you don't have to just stick with that exact shape that you find from the primitives. You're going to be able to create that shape with the primitives, and then you're going to be able to take the Z modeler tool, and you're going to be able to push that quite a bit to make some interesting shapes. And then don't forget, we also looked in previous videos in the stone section on how we could use the array mesh. So you could start incorporating the array mesh with different primitive types as well that you create. So there's all kinds of really cool possibilities that you could do with this tool set. So really your imagination is going to be your limiting factor on this.